Arts Oboe Quartet in F major with Pellman, Zuckerman and Lynn Harrell, but also, of course, with Ray Still. Now, he's America's greatest oboist, and as it's a very big place, then that's no mean achievement, and anyone listening who believes that he or she might be America's greatest oboist instead of Ray Still will kindly not mention it until the programme is over. Anyway, just witness his track record. He is principal oboist of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, which is one of the top 5 orchestras anywhere in the world, and I can hear Sir George Solti clapping in the background. For more than a quarter of a century, Ray has been regarded as the most consistently distinguished member of the Chicago Symphony, and yet he's just arrived for his first solo engagement in Britain. On Monday at the Queen Elizabeth Hall, the Academy of London opens its new season with a concert in the American Arts Series, and Ray will be playing concertos by Cimarosa and Richard Strauss. And welcome, sir, to your solo debut in London.
Thank you. I'm enjoying my stay here so far very much.
I ought to ask what kept you.
What kept me?
Yeah, from coming to London for your first solo performance.
Well, nobody asked me, actually.
Is that the real answer?
Right. I've been here many times at the Queen Elizabeth Hall and also at the Albert Hall.
Yeah.
For the proms.
But that's always been with the Chicago Symphony?
Yes, and usually we're here at the end of the prom season, and that's been really a thrill to see all those kids standing in front of the...
Yeah.
And hearing me give my A and going, yee, afterwards, you know. Good ribbing we always get there, but we enjoy that. And the Royal Festival Hall, people have talked about the dry acoustics, but I actually like it on the stage. I think it's very... I don't know what it sounds like in the audience, but it's very good on the stage.
Now, you've been playing the oboe professionally for may I ask you that without any embarrassment?
Years.
For 50 years.
50 years, right. Next year will be my 50th year. I started when I was 16, and I'm almost 66 now, so... But I'm a youngster compared to Leon Goossens. I mean, you're a famous oboe player here. By the way, it's an interesting fact that Leon Goossens and I were both, I hope Mr. Goossens is listening now, were inspired by the same oboe player. He, at the age of 17, 20 years before I was inspired by the same oboe player at the age of 17. He heard Mr. Henri de Busscher, an oboist, with the Halle Orchestra, when Goossens was 17 years old, and he determined that he was going to be a professional oboist then. And I heard the same oboist with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, where I used to usher as a student, about 20 years later, and I decided that I would become a professional oboist.
We've got a lot to thank him for.
And I've never met Leon Goossens. We had a date to meet, and he couldn't quite make it, and so we have not met yet.
But you started your working career in a rather unlikely place, didn't you? I mean, in fact, you studied engineering at first.
Yes, I got sidetracked during the war because I played when I was 19 years old. During this era of the WPA, Works Progress Administration, when the terrible depression was on in the United States, Roosevelt started this thing where you would put out-of-work musicians together, and most of these people were much older. I was 17 years old when that started, and I played with conductors like Klemper and Coates. And I played there, and then I went to the Kansas City Symphony when I was 19, took my first professional job as second oboe, and then the war interrupted. So during the war, I became a radio engineer. I didn't want to go into bands in the Army, so I became a radio man.
Might have ruined your mouth.
Yeah, and after the war was over, then I went to Juilliard and started on my career to becoming a professional oboe player.
You have a reputation for being an absolute fanatic, if you'll forgive the expression.
I do.
on what's called precision.
Precision?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, the perfect technique. The perfect.
Well, it all depends on what you call technique. So many musicians call technique digital technique, finger technique. Mm-hmm. I'm not a perfectionist there. I make lots of mistakes. Well, I hope not too many, but what I call technique is the production of a tone on the oboe which can simulate the human voice, or a great instrument like my hero Lester Young, the famous tenor saxophone player with Count Basie many years ago. These are some of my idols: Fritz Wunderlich, Christa Ludwig, Ellie Ameling, Fischer Dieskau, and the jazz greats. Now, that technique to me is the way of producing a tone that that makes the audience react, makes them touched, if you feel the emotion that you're trying to portray. And when people talk about technique, they usually talk about finger technique. Yeah. I'm not talking about that.
Now, we heard Mozart at the beginning. We'll be listening to some more Mozart a little later. But first of all, I want to play a contrast, really, between what a piece of music which is specifically written for an oboe solo and one which is part very much of a concerto. And we'd like to play a little of the Brahms Violin Concerto.
Well, could I give a little lead into this?
Please do.
My feeling is that in spite of the fact that I want to promote the fact that I'm playing a Strauss concerto with the Academy of London at this concert on Monday, I feel that the very pinnacle of music, the greatest music written for the oboe is the orchestral music, the music of the symphonies of Brahms, Beethoven, and this solo, which I call the granddaddy of all oboe solos, which happens to be in a violin concerto. In fact, one violinist once said, "Why should I play Isai?" I think it was. He didn't want to play the Brahms. They said, "Why?" He said, "Why should I play a concerto in which the oboe gets the best tune?"
Ray Still from the Brahms Violin Concerto. This is because you're trying to upstage.
We always think of it as the oboe concerto.
Yeah, that's right, but this is
accompanied by the violin.
That's right. This is because you're trying to upstage the other instruments.
Right.
Not many composers have been immensely fluent for the oboe, have they? They're on as a solo instrument.
Not as a solo instrument. During the Baroque period, there were many composers who wrote prolifically for the oboe. Vivaldi, Marcello, Albinoni, Handel was an oboist himself, by the way.
Was he?
Yes, among his other accomplishments. Bach wrote probably the greatest music ever written for the oboe. Some of the oboe concertos have been lost, and the Bach double, of course, which I recorded with Itzhak Perlman a couple of years ago in Israel, is an example of marvelous writing for the oboe. This is a half of a concerto. It's a double concerto for a violin and oboe. During the Romantic period, the oboe was kind of lost. I mean, nobody seemed to write for it. After Mozart, that is, after the classical period.
Why was that?
Well, the clarinet became the instrument that was in, and Brahms and Schubert and everybody wrote for the clarinet because it was a change. They were sick of hearing that nasal oboe, you know. Although the oboists during Mozart's period, Rahm, for instance, was considered a great, great oboist. Then there has been a revival in recent years of oboe concerti. For instance, one of your great English composer, Vaughan Williams, wrote an oboe concerto. Leon Goossens, Leon Goossens, his brother Eugene Goossens wrote an oboe concerto.
And there's also, of course, a revival of Mozart as well.
There's a revival of Mozart, right? But there is a revival of writing for the oboe. However, the very avant-garde music I leave to the younger people. I don't go in for the multiphonics and all those things. It's a whole. I feel that I haven't played all Bach and Mozart yet that I want to play, especially the chamber music of Mozart and the Bach cantatas. That's what I'd like to retire into an orchestra that plays only Mozart piano concerti, in which I play only as a member of the orchestra. By the way, at the concert on Monday night, Neil Ruttman will play a marvelous Mozart piano concerto, but I hate that concerto because it left out the oboe. That's one of the 2 out of 27 that Mozart wrote which did not include an oboe in the accompaniment. So you can have it. No, it's a beautiful, it's a beautiful Mozart piano concerto. But for me, one of the greatest joys in all of my playing experience is playing as a member of a symphony orchestra when a soloist is playing a Mozart piano concerto. And I've done this so often, you know. We had a marvelous bassoon player with the Chicago Symphony who said to me one night after we had played a Mozart piano concerto accompaniment, we came downstairs and he said, "Ray," he said, "don't tell anybody, but this is the only music I'd pay them to let me play."
Ray, thank you very, very much indeed. I will just repeat that you're performing on Monday at the Queen Elizabeth Hall, the Academy of London, and it's co-sponsored by the Joanna Hodges International Piano Conference and Competition. We'll end on something I suppose we've touched on as well, and that's the Mozart oboe concerto.
Could I just say that I'm so proud of this because my son wrote the cadenza for this. I think you'll hear probably the first movement, which culminates in the cadenza. And my son, with whom I just have finished recording in Stockholm this last year, a solo recording, is a very fine pianist and harpsichordist, wrote the cadenza for this. Now, most oboe players write their own cadenzas, and they're usually a dismal flop. I kept my hands off and let my son write it for me. He's a composer. So this cadenza you'll hear at the end of this movement is his cadenza, Tom Still.
Thanks very much indeed.